Okay, I wanted to make a quick video talking about the discussion between Richard Dawkins and Jordan Peterson. And most people are probably pretty unsurprised by everything that happened. It was pretty predictable. Dawkins was kind of maybe extra stubborn in his kind of materialist assertions. And Peterson didn't want to engage. The comment I left on Paul's video about it was, if Jordan's not going to say, yes, I believe in the virgin birth, because that's a question that Dawkins uses to determine if he needs to take anything you say seriously. So as soon as you say, I believe in the virgin birth, he's not going to take you seriously. However, I think that when we look at the presuppositions and how ridiculous Dawkins thinks it is that people would assert such a claim, there's a lot to be left to be desired. His basic premise is this super critical viewpoint where any and all written accounts from history, but especially the Bible, I guess we'd say, are to be misbelieved, assumed false, like completely fictitious, like fictional, no truth in there at all, apparently, which goes beyond the point that at some other place he probably likes to point out contradictions. Well, if you have contradictions, then they can't all be false, or they're not contradictions. But on the topics that he wanted to talk about, so first of all, with the virgin birth, Dawkins, in his evolutionary biology, assumes at least one miracle that is that's very similar to what you would need to have a virgin birth. So obviously the text does not tell us the nature of Jesus' conception from a materialist standpoint. But the evolutionary biology model assumes that at some point life, which began as a single-celled organism, developed into multicellular organisms. Now, as it stands, the single-cell organisms that we have, if they divide, they are not dividing into a two-cell and then four-cell multicellular organism. They each divide into additional single-cell organisms. So, as far as I know, we have never observed a single-cell organism making the leap into becoming a multi-cell organism. But that is what happens, that's what happens in multicellular organisms. The number of cells grows while the organism maintains its fidelity. So when the fertilized egg divides, it divides into 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells, et cetera, until you get to the trillions of cells and you have a fully grown human being, or a fully developed human being, maybe not grown. But all you would need then to have a virgin birth happen from a miraculous standpoint is some mechanism, something to happen to cause an egg to self-fertilize. So a self-fertilizing egg is all you would require. And then, which is to say, how much of a mutation is that? Probably less of a mutation than the first mutation from a single-cell organism to a multi-cell organism, where the single-celled organism has all of its needs and mobility and everything configured for being a single-celled organism. You just need one little thing to happen for an egg to self-fertilize, and then you'd have a virgin birth. So that's to say, evolution doesn't have a problem with the virgin birth happening. I don't think. I think it's probably a lesser miracle than the one that he bases his whole life on. Secondly, he was saying stuff like, "Oh, you believe Jesus had a father? Then he's not then it wasn't a virgin birth." Well, virginity is a concept of a woman that's not had sexual intercourse. So, that act is what we mean when we say somebody is a virgin or not. So, having a father does not necessarily mean that a woman could be born of a virgin. There's ways that some robust semen sample could be artificially introduced. And there was even, my wife watched that TV show Jane the Virgin. That was the whole premise of it. The girl never had sex, but she goes to her doctor, and this is malicious, but gets artificially inseminated. Well, she's still a virgin because she's never had sex. And generally speaking, the sperm and the egg are not the person from whom they are separate from the person. I mean, it's a separate set of DNA. That's the new. It's a partial set of chromosomes, but that's the partial set from which we get new life, new organisms with their own set of DNA. So that's an easy, I don't know, maybe she was swimming in the river and something happened, and that's a way that it could happen. I'm not saying this is what happened. I believe the Bible, but I'm just saying plausibility. If you're just going to dismiss the whole thing wholesale, that's a problem. And then, this is the bigger stretch, I guess you could say. But there's been these rumors that are, I think only maybe you're just a shade off of a Jesus mythicist if you believe that Mary conceived Jesus through being assaulted or something, by a Roman soldier. Well, I mean, from the standpoint of the world that Richard Dawkins wants to live in, I'm sure he would reject the notion that a girl whose hymen breaks before she has sexual intercourse is no longer a virgin. That's a sign that people use to measure virginity, but it was not the thing itself. So, the proof is more fragile than the reality. And I think from an ethical standpoint, from the world that we all want to live in as Westerners who are afraid of an Islamic takeover or something, I don't think that's going to happen, but if you're afraid of what that would be like, Augustine actually articulated that in the instances when things happen like war and a woman is assaulted against her will, which can result in pregnancy, it is not, she has done nothing to partake in that act and is guilty of no sin. And I think that is the right way that we would all want to approach those things. It's typically how we approach those things in reality. We may, which if you extend that logically, I think, virginity as a concept is something that cannot be stolen. It's only the volitional, gift. Without consent, the physical reality can change, but that's the same as, a girl getting kicked in the crotch, and being injured from that. That no less makes her not a virgin. So that's the virgin birth stuff. On the other thing of the memes, Jordan wanted to get into the memes, and he was trying to talk about Cain and Abel and the story of is there a real Cain and Abel? At a certain point, words and names kind of come to mean the same thing. So, obviously there was a first brother that killed another brother. And the definition that we have settled on by that, or, we conceive that the first time that happens is the story of Cain and Abel. So in whatever language they spoke, or doesn't really matter, Cain and Abel is the story of the first brother that killed another brother. The murderer's name was Cain, and Abel was the name of the brother that was killed. So, like, those names are synonymous with the thing. First brother killer means Cain, just as much as Cain is the first brother killer. Like, so there's not, the thing doesn't work the way that he thinks it does. But, you know, there has to be, you know, with his, like, meme thing, that's, you know, you have to have some kind of a first thing, a novel experience. So a novel experience happens, and then people will imitate it. And interestingly enough, in the Cain story, you have the descendants of Cain, and you have that young men are attacking Lamech, the descendant of Cain. So they are imitating through the mimesis the actions of Cain by attacking their human brother. The really interesting thing is that you know, so, and then he wanted to talk about the evolution of stories through the text. Within the text, you can see it's very interesting because you kind of have that whole thing happen. And then Lamech does something really interesting where he does this boast. And when people try to moralize the boast, it's stupid, like trying to say he's worse than Cain. Because what the boast does is he's taking advantage of what he's learned and creating a meme. So what we learned earlier in the story of Adam and Eve is that the concept of lying or deception was not introduced before the thing itself was introduced. So Eve is deceived, and she's pretty well blindsided by it because she has a cognitive dissonance. She doesn't have a category with which to weigh competing claims of truth. So that's how deception works. So then you have to choose, which means you have to then introduce some kind of thought pattern of doubt or skepticism, which is what Dawkins bases his whole career on. So, like, where did that come from? Where did that evolve from? Well, the Bible at least gives us a story that can make sense of how things can occur. So what Lamech does is he says, I am going to get revenge on anybody that attacks me. It's going to be so much worse than Cain. And it's a boast, but what it is it's really like the invention of kayfabe, and it's the first wrestling promo. And the point is not that he's so bad. The point is actually to stop people from attacking his family. So he's taking something that was destructive, the idea of deception, and he's turning it around and using it as a defense mechanism. And then if you go through the whole book of Genesis, you have the same thing happening over and over and over with these deceptive things being turned around for good over and over. So in the same way, you know, like Dawkins also brings up, like, oh, do you believe that Jesus died for your sins? And if we believe his whole meme thing, then we look at Jesus, we see that he introduces, I guess you could say, like the meme of nonviolent resistance. So Jesus introduces the nonviolent resistance meme. He doesn't totally introduce it, because I think you could say Abel is the one who really introduces that. I've said this before, but you know that it says Cain attacked and killed Abel, like it's two separate actions. Perhaps Abel could have fought back and chose not to. That's how I like to read it. But either way, so Jesus does, he introduces this nonviolent resistance meme where when the person attacking, and we can understand this, the person that's attacking is kind of relying on the feedback of the fight to continue pushing things forward. But if one person just stops fighting, it very quickly becomes an unsavory experience for the attacker. They don't want to do that. They want to, they'll stop fighting or whatever. And if it goes to the point of death, then at least the meme can infect the onlookers. And Jesus is not the only example of this. There's been many martyrs through history. One notable one from the 20th century is the story of Jim Elliot. He goes down there to reach this tribe, and then the tribe kills him, and then his wife goes back, and they're like, oh, wow, that lady whose husband we killed, normally that would scare people off, but for some reason she came back, and then they are receptive to hearing the gospel. So the death meme affects them in some ways. And this is really interesting because, so I wanted to talk about how Dawkins brought up that he is very interested in the evolution of stories. Like, where did the problem he's bringing up is we don't have like all the different revisions and manuscript history of these biblical texts. We have some of that stuff if you compare the different versions, but it's more speculative. It's not like chronological. But there is a really great example of the evolution of a story text, and that is The Last of the Mohicans. So The Last of the Mohicans was this book that was written in like 1820 something, I believe. And it takes place a little bit earlier. It takes place in like during the French and Indian War, prior to the American Revolution. And it's interesting because it predates Darwin and the idea of evolution, but it really also, or his specific version anyway, but it kind of shows the groundwork of like what was going on in that time. So one of the big themes of it was that like the noble savage, Rousseau's idea was that the noble savage was becoming extinct. And this was like a thing where, the Western man looks at the Native American and kind of like mourns that loss because we honor his primitive spirit of masculinity. So that was kind of a theme that was, undercutting the book of colonialism and like what are we doing with our Western progress? Like, not in a bad way. Like, it's very much still pro the white man, but it's like, we had to eliminate the savages, but by gosh, what a courageous bunch they were. So you look at this book, and people have said like it's largely unreadable. Like, and the story is so convoluted, and there's all this crazy stuff. And you have like the main bad guy, his name's Magua, and he's in all the versions. But like in the original one, he's mad at the British man because he like got him hooked on fire water and it made him weak. There's the British commander Monroe has two daughters, Alice and Cora. In the book version, Cora is like partially descended from a slave because like he had two wives. And then there's Natty Bumppo, which is who's called Hawkeye in the Daniel Day-Lewis movie. But, he's like this kind of Western guy that lives with the Indians. And the story is super convoluted. Different people die. There's different romance. And, like, the romance is barely even a theme in the book. It's not a theme at all, hardly, I don't think. And then you go through, and there's all these different versions. So there was like a movie adaptation, like 1920, where they introduced like a sort of a romance angle, but it is with different characters. It's not really central to the thing. Then basically it goes from the 1920 version. The 1936 version is a big update. And in that one, like the daughters get kidnapped, the good guys rescue them, but Natty Bumppo's in trouble because he's committed treason, basically. And so then the British guy pardons him, and it's like, yay, everybody wins, and everybody goes home happy. So that's different, where it's less people dying and less kind of tragedy than the original one. The original one was kind of like a pointless tragedy. And then you get to like the most modern one, the one from 1992 with Daniel Day-Lewis, and it has evolved to satisfy what people are looking for in a story. So Magua's motivation for his, being the bad guy is much more complex. He was sold into slavery. His wife ends up marrying another man. He and due to this, being sold into slavery, he has a dual identity. So he pretends to be a Mohawk, but he's really a Huron. And his motivation for revenge on Monroe, he says he wants to kill him and his children so that their seed will perish from the earth. It's just kind of an interesting, put the biblical kind of theme in there. And then with the two daughters, there's a romance between the younger daughter and the son of the Mohican chief. So the son's name is Uncas. It's I think that was omitted that was not going to be possible or something in the original one because that was just absurd. That like a Western woman would be interested in the red man. Like the red man could have interest in her as a piece of property, and then so that's them, and then the older sister is like in this love triangle where the British commander Duncan wants to marry her. He proposes marriage. He asks her to think about it. He tells her about how they would have a good life in England, and it's okay if she doesn't love him. They can grow to love one. She may grow to love him in time. And he's a very pragmatic, reasonable guy. And he's all about following the rules and sticking up for Britain and all that stuff. So then she, however, falls in love with Daniel Day-Lewis's character, and it's a mutual thing, and they both really like each other. And then Duncan has an opportunity to kind of get Hawkeye out of the way because he lets some of the men escape the fort instead of just staying there and defending a fort that's going to be overtaken no matter what. So Duncan has reason to arrest him and hang him on charges of treason or something like that. So he's kind of in pursuit of him or whatever. But then they all get captured by the Hurons, and the interesting thing is that the Hurons just are there, and they hear Magua's case, and they decide that Magua's too bitter, and his desire for revenge is too severe. And so now that the girl's father is dead, they can kill one daughter for his grievances, but the other one Magua needs to marry so that the gray-haired Monroe's seed will remain in the earth. So he says, okay, Magua, you got to marry the younger daughter, and we're going to burn the older daughter alive. So the older daughter, that's the one that the British guy and Daniel Day-Lewis are fighting over. And Daniel Day-Lewis says, no, take me instead. Well, the British guy is translating here because he speaks French and Daniel Day-Lewis does not. And he takes this opportunity to advocate for himself to be the substitute rather than Hawkeye. So he could allow Hawkeye to give himself up, and then he would be free to marry Cora. He would be her sole protector, provider, and it would definitely work out. But he realizes that she doesn't love him, and she does love Hawkeye. Maybe he's a little bit worried about what kind of a guy Hawkeye is. It's kind of a rogue. He's in it for the romance, and then he's going to be out, on his way again. So Duncan, since he's the one able to speak, instead says, I will take her place, and he offers himself up. And so Hawkeye and Cora, Hawkeye's now in charge of getting Cora out of here, getting everybody to safety or whatever. And that sacrifice is like the meme. It's the meme of the Levirate marriage. So this is something that, Joseph pointed out, and I totally agree with him. If you look at the story of Cain and Cain's descendants, all of their names are variants on the name Abel. And basically, in Abel's death, it starts this kind of nonviolent resistance meme, whereby Cain gives birth to Abel's sons. And that's the theme of Levirate marriage. And what Duncan's sacrifice does is it's going to transform Hawkeye. He can't just have a fling in the woods and leave this girl high and dry. He is now responsible to take care of a woman who this honorable man gave his life to save, so that he could in fact be with her. And so, you think about like, well, what's going to happen there? If they have a son, what are they going to name their son? Who are they going to name their son after? They're going to name their son after the guy who died so that they could be together. So, that's how these memes like really work. But it's interesting how the evolution of the story, which is something that Richard Dawkins was in, had to keep going more and more toward the Christian story to become satisfying and have the right resonance with people, with our psychology, And there's other stories of that too, from kind of the time of Darwin. There was all these myths that crop up, new Darwinian myths, but the stories have evolved over time, and even the way that like our stories about the genes have evolved over time. Because if you listen to like Brett and Heather Weinstein, when they talk about the genes, they speak about them as if they are God, and they have a specific desire and a specific plan to do very specific things. They have a will to see the world become, and biological life become shaped in some sort of way, which is where you even get to the thing where he talked about Jordan with it. He can almost see like how, okay, if you kind of you can kind of pray God into existence basically by the mimesis. If we all act as if God were real, he will manifest in some way, or it will have the transformative effect. Now, it's way easier if you just believe it's all true, like I do, but, it's just silly, the people that are sticking up for Dawkins and think that he was owning Peterson by insisting on those dumb questions. Nobody was impressed by that, and it was stupid. So that is my analysis of the conversation, and hopefully people enjoy this, and I get more famous on the internet. Thank you.